and I had to keep an eye on him. He didn't like
Of course, yeah.
We had Dave take him down to the nursery.
They're beautiful.
Yeah.
Very pretty.
And he's 96 years old, too.
Wow.
But see, this was all fenced in, except they added that part there to make the fence a little bit higher. Because either Mindy or Luther could have jumped over what was there before. Before all the trees leafed off between here and there, and when it was full of snow on the ground, you could see it. Things first, and Kurt would look at them and see, like coloring or whatever it was, that he wasn't doing it that well, and he'd just scribble. So all of that could have been, and spelling was always hard for your dad.
Mm-hmm.
And that could be because, they had a job getting him to breathe at first.
Mm-hmm.
But they didn't have to put either of them in an incubator. However, when Kurt kept losing weight, when a baby's born, they do lose a certain amount of weight until your milk comes in. And because they were born premature, they were premature about 6 weeks or so. And they didn't have any eyelashes or eyebrows.
Mm.
And they wanted to sleep all the time. So the doctors set up this little pump in my room, and I had to pump my milk, and then they had to take it down to the nursery and give most of the milk to Kurt because he kept losing weight, and they couldn't get him on a formula, that would stay down. So then they would give the rest of the milk to Ken, and he would tolerate a formula in addition to that. So then when they wouldn't let the babies come home until they reached the weight of 6 pounds. So I got to, I couldn't hold either of them because that was the time they wouldn't let you in the nursery. They wouldn't bring the babies in for me to nurse because it took the nurses flicking them on the bottom of their feet to get them to stay awake long enough to eat. So anyhow, Ken got to be 10 or 6 pounds about 2 weeks old, and I brought him home. And he was on a formula that he was doing pretty good on. But I had to still pump my milk at home and send it down to the hospital in a cab for Kurt. And I didn't get to take Kurt home till he was a month old.
Wow.
Before he reached the 6 pounds. So that was why when they were little, I didn't encourage anybody to come in, how cute, they wanted to pick him up, but Kurt would pick up colds and it would go to his chest. So I didn't go along with handling the babies all around.
Mm-hmm.
So, but even knowing that I had delivered twins, about 11:30 at night, the doctors went back to their office and looked at the x-rays again. They still could only see one baby.
Really?
So, and then when I got pregnant with John, and I kept getting big, and I could feel life all over. And I said to Dr. Biss, I said, do you suppose I'm going to have twins again? And he says, no, I don't think so. But you've heard that before. So then they took an x-ray, and John's head was here, his rump was here, his knees were here, and his feet were way up under my ribs. So that's why it took him so long to get born. But one of the doctors, Dr. Carney, went to some kind of a conference during this time when they were waiting for Hegland to have her baby. And Dr. Biss said, you know what the first thing Paul asked me when he got back was, has Hegland delivered yet? And I had to tell him, no, not yet. So there again, they thought I was going to have an elephant, but then when they saw how he was stretched out, and the nurses said, "Yo, Lil, he is a 10-month baby," because he would follow the light, right from the way when he was born.
Did they have
And-
C-sections back then?
You what?
Did they have C-sections back then? Could they do
Oh yeah, they
C-sections?
did have, but well, they had to use forceps for Sandra because that doctor was, like she said, a horse doctor. And he insisted that you nurse your baby whether you had enough milk or not. And she had what they called 6-month colic. Everything, her stomach was just hurting her all the time. So anyhow, come to find out, Sandra couldn't take the dextromultose that they put in formulas in. And then Ken could take dextromultose, but Kurt couldn't. Well, I finally got Sandra on a formula with sugar in it, and that worked fine with her. The colic went away from one day to the next. And then we tried sugar with Kurt, and that just made it worse. And so then I had to put him on Carol syrup. So when they were on bottles, I had to make up 2 sets of formula every day and mark the bottles. See, I didn't realize until just a few years ago that dextromultose is wheat-based, and he couldn't take it and Sandra couldn't take it. So now Sandra has to stay away by spells from stuff that has wheat in it.
Oh,
And
really?
when your dad stays off that and takes the vitamins that Sandra is selling, he feels a lot better.
Hmm.
Oh,
Who was Aunt Sandra closest to?
you what?
Who was Aunt Sandra close to out of the boys?
Well, they were just kind of all together, like I used to line them up on the couch, and read to them, because you only have 2 hands, and in order to give them each a little bit of individual attention, that was the only way I could do it. So no, well, one time she said, see, before I married Will and I had the 3 boys, Sandra's cousins were all getting baby sisters. In her dad's family, there were 4 boys and 1 girl, and when the boys got married, they ended up with 12 daughters between them, not a boy in the bunch. So anyhow, I said to Sandra, when she was complaining one time about having so many brothers, you remember before they were born, you wanted a baby brother or sister, and I wasn't even married? And she said, I just wanted 1, not 3.
Well,
And I'm a combination of German and French on my father's side, and English and Dutch on my mother's side. So they're hamburger. They're Norwegians way back.
okay.
Because both Wilb's mom and dad came over from Norway when they were young people.
Okay.
So
Tell us that story. So they came over. Wilbur's parents
yeah, came over
came
from
over
Norway.
from Norway.
Now Sandra's dad's mother was born in DeKalb, but I'm not sure about her husband. But he was full-blooded Swedish too. So she took after the Swedish part of the family. In fact, she looks like him, except for her being a female and him being a male.
Go ahead.
In my immediate family, out of my 5 brothers, only 2 lived to grow up, and myself. My dad died when he was 40. My mother died when she was 41. My uncle who raised me died when he was 49. So I always prayed I would reach 50, and by that time my family would be all grown up and on their own. So I consider all the years since then to be bonus years. So, but in Creston, Illinois, little tiny town, 450 people.
You lived there for 4 years.
Yeah, and I taught at the school for 5, but the first year I drove back and forth. And then when we moved over there, Kurt and Ken were in 6th grade, and John was in my room in 5th grade. And then we left there when John graduated from 8th grade, and Ken and Kurt had put in 1 year in the Rochelle High School. But that was because Ken's asthma got so bad that I had to do, and I had reached the top of the salary scale there. And it was hard to earn enough money for all of us. So that's when we moved to Phoenix.
What year would that have been? Do you know?
That was 1963
Okay.
in the summer. You like. And actually, Kurt ended up with more of the Hegland genes, like his dad and his grandpa, than Ken did. Ken was more laid back. But over the years, I've found out that with twins, that's very often the case, that one will be more outgoing and bouncy and the other one will be more laid back. And the twins that I was telling you about that live here in Cranbrook, they're girls, but they're the same way. So they... Okay, when we lived in Creston, we couldn't have a dog on the property. The landlord wouldn't let us, but we did have cats. And we had a mother cat who, I didn't have her spayed because every time she had kittens, I could always find homes for them because they were good mousers. And the mother always trained them, and they were house trained. And so anyhow, this tiny little long-haired kitten came in the neighborhood. So Kurt fell in love with that, and that was his. Well, come to find out, that kitten had some kind of a liver problem. So it got sick, and we finally had to get it put to sleep. So when we left there, this woman who lived on the farm had 4 of the red-headed boys. The littlest one wanted a cat, and they had a whole barn full of barn cats, but they were not house trained. So she said, Lil, when you move, can we have your mother cat? Because they wanted a cat for him for in the house. So that's where she went, Pookie. No, not Pookie, that was in Creston, in Phoenix. So anyhow, when we moved to Phoenix, I got a kitten from Ken and Joyce. They had a mother cat that kept having batches. And I had her spayed after she had the first batch, and Kurt said, Mom, I have to keep one of her kittens, because he had to have a cat himself. So here comes the tiniest little runt of the bunch. The one born last was all gray, so he called a Mouse. And if you don't think that was crazy to go outside and the neighbors hear you go, here Mouse, here Mouse, here Mouse, trying to get the cat to come in to eat. Was living with my aunt at one time, and she told me to let the kids come and visit, with my aunt one at a time. I can't remember where we were. We were living in DeKalb then. Had to have been. Anyhow, this one time when Ken was there, they had all wooden floors through the house that were waxed, and Ken was not used to that. So he slipped at the top of the stairs and went down half a flight. And he got up, and Joy went over and picked him up, and here's this big lump on the back of his head. And Joy was terrified. What happened? And in between times, Ken finally got out. And Joy, that lump has always been there. His head was shaped this way. So that's always been part of him. But he had to tell her that because he didn't know.
Yeah.
So.
Oh my gosh, she's big.
This is exciting.
Yeah.
Hi.
He didn't even bark.
Down.
Okay.
Okay, 1, 2, 3. Greetings from Canada. You're recording. Yep, it's recording right now.
Okay. Yeah.
Take 2.
Okay.
Greetings
From Canada.
Stress management or whatever, and he said, probably what you need is just to sort of look at your boundaries type thing, and he suggested this book on boundaries, and it was just like a light went out. That's a little water to go. You're building a national railroad museum here, but this is a side street.
Yeah, the red light.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Well, just tell us what year you were born and where and.
Oh, I was born December 16th, 1918 in the St. Elizabeth Hospital in Chicago, Illinois. And my father's name was Edward Needner, and my mother's name was Estelle Robinson Needner. And I had altogether 5 brothers, and I was the only girl. But my brother older than me and the next younger lived to grow up to be adults.
What did what did your siblings die of? The ones who passed away.
Had
I'm sorry.
health problems.
Can
from
you
the time
start?
he was little.
Can you start over? Your younger brother?
Oh, my younger brother had health problems from the time he was little, and by the time he was in his 60s, he had I don't know how many surgeries, but by the time he died, he had 17 different ones. And so he died from an accumulation of things. And he also lost one kidney shortly after World War II to disease. So it was hard on him when he had some of these other things pop up.
Which
To
brother
only
was that?
have one kidney.
Which brother was that?
That was Leslie. And my brother William Alfred Needner, who went by the name Alfred until he grew up and decided he wanted to be called Bill. That keeps flicking. Is it supposed to do that?
Oh. See now,
No, I see.
they do the same thing.
Oh, they do.
Yes. Okay. Why don't you tell us about your parents, what their names were, and how long they lived? Give us some background on them.
Oh, okay. My father was Edward, I forget what his middle name was, Needner, and he was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and moved to Chicago, Illinois. And he met my mother and married her, and then when he was 40, at the time he was working at the Cracker Jack Company in Chicago, their boiler exploded in the boiler room, and in the process of trying to smother the flames, my father was burned on both arms, and hospitalized, and he died within a week. So they had to do an autopsy and found out that because he halfway raised himself, his teeth and tonsils were neglected, and poison had been draining down toward his heart, so he really died of a heart attack. Then I went to live with an uncle, Uncle Otto Blaylock Needner.
How old were you?
My aunt,
How old were
Elsie.
you? How old were you at the time?
I was about 7. And then for at least 1 year we lived with my aunt's mother in a suburb of Joliet called Forest Park. And I went to school in 3rd grade there. I fell down and broke both bones in my right arm. Then my aunt and uncle moved to a suburb.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. They moved to a suburb of Chicago called Downers Grove, Illinois. And my uncle commuted between there and Chicago as he was still working at the Cracker Jack Company. And we moved to another house in Downers when I was in, I don't know, probably 8th grade then. And while we lived on Rogers Street in Downers Grove, my youngest cousin Joyce was born. And so I kind of babysat and helped care for Joyce and for her older sister June. And I went to the same school from 3rd grade through 8th grade, and then all the way through high school with the same group of students. What else do you want?
Can you
Explain how come you went to live with your aunt and uncle after your dad died? Like, what happened to the brothers and sisters?
Oh, well, my mother still had my two brothers to raise, and my health was being affected by the city. So I was on the verge of getting TB. So my father wanted to be sure my aunt and uncle took me so I could get out of the city. So I grew up away from my own family.
Did you still keep in touch with them?
Oh yes, yes. But then my mother, who had been diabetic all of her life, had to have gallbladder surgery when I was a freshman in high school. And following the surgery, she got post-operative pneumonia. And since there wasn't any penicillin then, she died from that.
What did you do after high school?
Oh, after high school, I worked during the summer.
Wait, real quick, say what you did in high school.
What?
Tell her what all the things you did in high school.
Oh, well, in high school, I tried to carry straight A's. I did most of the time. But then by my senior year, I was in a lot of outside activities. In my senior year, I was editor of the school yearbook, business manager of the school paper, head of the student council. I had a minor office in one of the other groups I belonged to. And I was also on the school's debate team and then doing extemporaneous speaking. And our high school had college day for the seniors near the end of their senior year. And I met the Dean of Women from the Northern Illinois State Teachers College. And she said that I could have a job working in her office, taking her dictation and typing and keeping files under the NRA system while I went to school. So that's one reason why I went to, when I went to become a teacher. And so all 4 years I worked in her office. I tried debating up there for 1 year, but that got to be too much because with the work I was doing, I didn't have any study periods at all, let alone keeping up with debating. However, I still was in organizations in college, but needless to say, I did not carry a straight A average. Almost a B, but not quite. But I was elected to a freshman women's honorary group called Pleiades, and also when I was a senior, I was elected to a senior women's honorary group. And I was in college from 1937 to 1941. And that was a teacher's training college, so I was enlisted under a 4-year program, English major and social science minor. So I had a bachelor's degree in education, and when I graduated with most of my majors for high school. However, when I graduated, English teachers were a dime a dozen on the landscape. So most of us who trained for that area of teaching ended up on the junior high level. So my first job was teaching in Geneva, Illinois, and I taught English, music appreciation, for which I had no background at all, and the other skills connected with reading to 2 7th grade classes and 1 8th grade class. And I had an 8th grade homeroom. Then at the end of that year, I got married to my daughter's father. It was during the war, and he was first drafted, and then he was transferred to the Air Force.
What was his name?
His name was Norman Donald Carlson. And it was a good thing, probably, they didn't hire married teachers then. However, they changed their minds by the time next fall started, because all the eligible men were gone. So they had to take women who were married. But anyhow, it was just as well, because I found out I was expecting Sandra. And while her dad was in service, I lived in a little building, she and I together, and since he was in the Air Force and they did not get family allowances, I had to work part-time, so I worked at a factory that had been turned over to making observation planes for the Navy, and I worked at night, and Sandra's grandmother watched her during the night, and I'd go over and get her in the morning and be with her all day. Then when Norman got his wings, then he could send home, even before then, send home his pay, and he could live on his flight pay because they were paid so much extra for all their flight training time. And he ended up being a bombardier navigator, was very good at it. Then he was shipped overseas and ended up in England and Scotland for the rest of his training, and he was trained in a B-26, which had a crew of 3 commissioned officers and 3 non-commissioned officers. Where I don't know how many missions they flew before he was transferred to the squadron leader's plane, because he was such a good navigator. And in the for the fellows that were in the B-26s, when they had flown 65 missions, they would get to come stateside and spend the rest of the war over home. However, their plane was shot up over Germany, and they made it back to within 20 miles of their base, which was outside of Paris, France. And 3 of the crew, the 3 non-commissioned officers, made it all right. And Norman, the co-pilot, didn't, and the pilot went down with the plane.
What mission number was that?
That was at the end of mission number 62. Now, can we stop for a few?
I'll stop to say that.
Yeah.
Okay.
You had talked about your first husband, and he passed away. Now, how long were you single, and when did you meet Wilbur?
Oh, well, I had known Wilbur from the time I had started going with Sandra's father. He was in the war in the Pacific area in the motor pool, and he was repairing machines, trucks and that for the Army, regular Army. And after the war, when he came home, well, I didn't go with anybody before I started going with him. And when it finally sunk through that Sandra's dad wasn't coming home, then I started dating Wilbur. And we were married and had twin sons, Ken and Kurt, born December 10th, 1947. And then on February 25th, 1949, I had another son. So for a while I had 3 children in diapers. And Sandra was she wasn't even in grade school yet.
What was Wilbur's full name?
Oh, Wilbur's name was, stop it.
Or
Yeah. And we were married about,
No, my finger just slipped off. What you were saying is fine. You were married how many years? Or how long?
about 8.5. And then we were divorced because of alcoholism. So from the time Ken and Kurt were in 2nd grade and John was in 1st grade and Sandra was in junior high, I raised them more or less by myself. We continued to live in DeKalb, Illinois. Then I went back to teaching, and I taught 2 years in a little town south of DeKalb called Waterman, Illinois. Then I changed and taught for 1 year in another little town called Creston, Illinois, and I moved my family over there the 2nd year I taught, and altogether I taught there 5 years. Now, what else do you want to know about that?
Where did you go from there? Where did you teach after that?
Okay. While I taught in Creston, I basically had the 5th grade. It was a wonderful place to teach. It was a wonderful place for the family. And Sandra went 1 year to high school there, and then she stayed with some friends in DeKalb her senior year so that she could graduate with the group she went to school with. And because of Ken's asthma, I decided I had to make a move from that area. So my cousin, who had moved many years before out to Phoenix, Arizona, I flew out at Christmas time and visited with her and decided to move my family out there. Ken's asthma was set off by some things that I could control, but the biggest problem was the dampness in the air. And so he would miss 20 days of school about in the spring and 20 days in the fall when the humidity was so bad and it was rainy. So we moved out there after school got out in 1963. When I got out there, I didn't have a regular job, but I had already sent resumes to about 13 or 14 different school districts. So first I did some subbing during the day and worked at a hamburger stand chain at night until I got a regular job at the Rosalinda School in the southern part of Phoenix. And I started regularly there in January of '64. Kurt and Ken and John all attended the Alhambra High School, and Ken and Kurt were sophomores then, and John was a freshman. Ken and Kurt both dropped out of high school beginning of their senior year. That was when a lot of the fellows they knew were signing up to go into the armed services during the Vietnam War. And Kurt signed up to go into the Navy, and he ended up being sent to the Air Force or the Navy base in San Diego, California. And Ken tried to sign up, and they caught up with the fact that he had asthma, so they wouldn't let him sign up. So John was the only one who graduated from high school then. Both Kurt and Ken studied, and Kurt took a GED test in the Navy, and when it came time for them to find out how they did grade-wise, Kurt was the only high school dropout who got such a high grade. And a lot of the fellows who got high grades had not only finished high school, but had several years of college under their belt. And Ken studied at home and took the GED test in Phoenix. He had to wait a year because that was a setup. If you dropped out of school, you waited a year before you took the GED. And he ended up with a really high score too.
What was their IQ in high school? You had said that they had a really high IQ.
What was what?
Their IQ
Oh,
when they were young?
both Ken and Kurt's IQ were about 125. Now I found out your IQ can change. They used to think once they figured it out that was it. But in my own case, my IQ in high school was 125. And then when I was teaching special ed in South Phoenix, I was part of a study for a young man who was working on his doctorate, and part of it was to give me another IQ test, and I was 135 on that. So it can change up, and I suppose if you get into something else, it probably could go down. So,
Is there anything else you want to know about her life before we move on to Helgoland and ancestors?
I'll stop there.
stomach to get in bed with you. And I was not of the disposition to try different ones out and see if they could take it. So I just put all thoughts of remarrying out of my mind. So I got by fine.
Well, why don't you tell us about our ancestors, where they come from, Helgoland, all of that.
Okay, all right, because you're both Heglands.
Right.
Yeah. All right, Wilbur's mom and dad both grew up in Norway and came over to the United States as young people. And his father came from an area in Norway called Helgeland. And his mother either came from Oslo or Stavanger. I've heard both places, and I'm not sure which. But anyhow, they ended up in DeKalb, Illinois. DeKalb, Illinois had whole colonies of Norwegians and another group of Swedes, another group of German Lutherans, groups of several different people from Central European countries. Oh, yeah.
You were talking about the
Yeah,
different.
Ole and Anna had 11 children. One daughter died in infancy.
You know what, Grandma? I think I spoke over you. Can you say that again? Repeat what you said. Ole and Anna.
Oh,
Will you repeat
okay.
that, please?
Ole and Anna lived in DeKalb, Illinois, and had 11 children. At least 2 of them died before they grew up. And when I became part of the family, there still were 7 children living. One of the brothers had died, I don't know how many years before, and one of the sisters, Jenny, had died in childbirth. Wilbur was 1, 2, 3, probably the 3rd oldest boy in the family. And after Wilbur, there were, let me think. I don't know if he had one sister, but anyhow, there was a sister Avis and a brother they called Bud. His name was Robert. He died quite young in a very odd highway accident. Wilbur and I were divorced.
Real quick, how did Wilbur ask you to marry him?
Oh, how? I don't know as he ever, we got down on his knees and proposed. No.
He didn't do that? Get
No,
down
he
on.
didn't. He
Oh.
didn't get
How
down
did you
on
know
his
then that
knees.
you were going to get married?
What?
How did you know then that you were going to get married?
Well, we were in love with each other. We were going to, No. Now, what else do you want to know about Bob's background?
Tell me, explain how the Heglands came, how they came to get that last name. Tell me how
Oh,
people picked their
okay.
last names back then.
Okay. When people from the Scandinavian countries came over to the U.S., especially the Norwegians, they could take either their name of their father with son on the end. So if your father's name was Ole, you would be Ole's son. Or you could take it from the region that you grew up. So in the same family, you might have an Olson and a Hegland, and they would be brothers. So trying to trace your ancestry back under those conditions is quite a job. And one year, my youngest son, John, tried to look up the family name in the big library in Salt Lake City that's been built up by the Mormons. And he found out that that was how names were develop, and the only way you could be absolutely sure was if somebody from that family was still living, and you could go over to Norway and meet them and become acquainted with them. Otherwise, it was hard to trace your ancestry back beyond when they came over to the U.S.
Do you want to ask her your feeling questions?
Oh, my turn is tell me like how you felt when you first became a grandmother, when Donnie was born. Like, how did you feel being a grandma?
Oh, very, very happy. Yes, and I and I felt very, very happy every time since I got another grandchild. And I think I have been very fortunate to be able to spend as much time with my grandchildren even after I moved up here to Canada, so that I can keep in close touch with all of them.
How did you feel when you first became a parent?
Very happy also. Although I was a little bit sad when Sandra was born, because her father was out in California, and I knew it probably would be quite a long time before I ever got to see her. And as it turned out, she was 9.5 months old before he saw her. When he got through his training and got his wings in the navigation school in New Mexico, then he was able to come home on leave. And that was the first and only time he saw her. So I felt kind of sad then. And I was completely flabbergasted when my sons were born, because they weren't expecting two, they were only expecting one.
Tell us that story. You
What?
were in the delivery room. Tell us what happened in the delivery room and how you came to find out you had twins.
Oh, okay. When I got pregnant, I usually gained quite a bit of weight. And when I had Sandra, I gained 37 pounds, and she only weighed 1 ounce less than 7 pounds. So when I got pregnant with the twins, I gained 54 pounds straight out, and I didn't gain weight anyplace else. So the doctors never put me on a diet. However, they did x-ray, and they could only see one baby, and they thought I was going to have an elephant. So when they thought it was time the baby should come, they sent me to the hospital to take castrol and quinine and induce labor. When the babies were born, one who came out first was Ken, only weighed 5 pounds 11 ounces. So I thought, something's wrong here. So the doctor who was giving me little bits of ether from time to time said, "Lil, you've got another baby." And I said, "What is it?" He said, "We don't know what's inside you yet." So then Kurt was born, and he only weighed, that's blinking again.
5 pounds.
Okay. You all right to start talking?
Yep.
Okay. All right. Kurt only weighed 5 pounds and 5 ounces, and they had a job trying to get him to breathe. However, they did get him started breathing, and took him down the nursery, and the doctors were still, 2 of them were still there talking, and I asked them when they were going to stitch me up and send me back to my room, and they said they were trying to decide whether my sons were fraternal twins or identical twins, because there was only one afterbirth, but each one was in his own sac, which is not common with twins if they're identical twins. Very often they're in the same sack. So anyhow, they did decide they were identical twins, which it turned out to be. They were identical mirror twins. Ken's hair parted on the right side, which is where the largest percentage of men's hair parts, and Kurt's hair parted on the left side. And also the doctor showed me that whereas people's ears, and nobody really realizes this, are not necessarily the same from one side of your head to the other, and theirs were different like everybody else's, but they were similar, but on the other side of their head from each other. So they knew they were identical twins. And they also said that very often when identical twins got older, they would be away from each other and go into a room and do the same things without each ever knowing what the other one had done, and that worked out with them too. They were born without any eyelashes or eyebrows, and they were premature, and they had to be fed every 2 hours in the nursery, and the nurses had to hold them and flick them on the bottom of their feet to keep them awake long enough to eat. And when my milk came in, I had a milking machine in my room and had to pump my milk and send it down to the nursery. Kurt kept losing weight until he could get mother's milk, so they gave him all the milk he needed and then gave the rest to Ken, plus a formula, which Ken did all right on. At that time, they would not let parents go into the nursery. They would not bring the babies out of the nursery into the mother's rooms. So I did not get, first of all, to take the boys home until each one weighed 6 pounds. And I never got to hold them until then.
How long did that take?
Well, with Ken, it took about 2 weeks, and he reached 6 pounds. And he was on a formula for a little while before I was able to bring him home. He went through a period where he wouldn't keep the formula down, and for about 3 days they had to feed him with a tube. But by the time they let me take him home, he was eating all right and on the formula. At home, I had to set the alarm clock every 2 hours, night and day, and continue to feed him that often, and pump my milk and send it down to the hospital in a cab for Kurt. Kurt didn't reach the 6 pound weight until he was a month old. And when I went down to the hospital to get him, the nurses were kidding me. They said, "Say, isn't this the one we already sent home?" So they couldn't tell them apart. And when they got older, in fact, when they were in kindergarten, all 4 of my children came down with some kind of a flu. And it hit Kurt very hard, and he ended up with a very dangerous blood condition where his white corpuscles were destroying the red, and where he was losing the platelets in his blood, so his blood wouldn't clot. So he had to be in the hospital and get blood transfusions and IVs, and his blood had to be sent to the virus lab in Chicago just about every day while they tried to zero in on what it was that was affecting him. and they never could find out exactly what virus it was in the lab. But eventually, the blood transfusion he got helped his own blood to start clotting. And while he was in the hospital, of course at that time they didn't allow children in the hospital.
I'm ready.
Okay?
Okay?
Oh, all right. When Kurt got home, while Kurt was in the hospital, somebody brought Sandra and Kurt and John down, and they couldn't go in the room and visit with him, but Ken could stand on the railing of the cement railing of the steps outside and look into Kurt's room, so they got to see each other. Then he and John and Sandra and whoever brought him down went in the little waiting room off the lobby. While they were in there, this nurse came to the door, took one look at Ken, and went tearing down the hall to Kurt's room. She thought somebody had lost their marbles, and they were letting this poor, sick little boy go home from the hospital, and he wasn't ready to. And that was the first time she realized that they were twins. When Kurt got home from the hospital, he still kept running a fever, and he shouldn't have been doing that. So I had to take him back down to the clinic, and they found out that the poisoning in his blood had resulted in a very rare kind of nephritis. So I was supposed to keep him down for 6 weeks. And once a week I had to take him down to the clinic, and he had to have blood tests again. And they'd put his blood on one of those, in a little tube, on one of those things that whirligigged around to see what settled in it. It was the hardest job in the world to keep Kurt down halfway still for 6 weeks. He could walk and play and do everything else with 103 fever. So anyhow, he finally got over that. Then down the road, when they were in 3rd grade, they again got flu of some kind, and Ken started getting little freckly type things on his elbows and on his knees and on his ankles. So I got him down to the doctor's office right away, and he was hospitalized. Where Kurt's blood problem came because the blood was destroying itself, Ken's blood vessels were breaking at the ends, out the ends of the capillaries, because his blood pressure was so high. But the end result was the same, that he had developed this rare kind of a nephritis as a result of whatever bug was going around then. When they were both grown up, and after both of them were married, I think they had children by then, they both had a relapse of this very rare kind of nephritis. And Ken took the doctor's medicine and got over it. Kurt was a little bit harder to, I don't know if he ever got over it. But anyhow, he still had kind of an after effect from the nephritis. When they were growing up, they went through all the childhood diseases, with one child coming down with them first, and then 2 weeks later having 3 more cases. They went through whooping cough that way. Sandra had not had her booster shot before she went to school. She must have picked it up at a picnic we went to, where there were some people there from Chicago. There was absolutely no not one case of whooping cough in DeKalb. So it took a long time for the doctors to realize she had whooping cough. However, one of the neighbors kept telling the other kids not to play with her. You remember that? Because she had whooping cough. And I took poor Sandra down to the doctor at least 3 times, have her checked. No, she didn't have whooping cough. And one Sunday, all 3 boys started whooping. So I called the doctor, and he said, uh-oh, she does have whooping cough. So I said, how come you didn't catch up with it? And he said that you can't really diagnose whooping cough unless you hear them whoop. And she never did, at least not in the doctor's office. So Sandra coughed at bedtime until she irped. Ken and Kurt had had their shots less than a year before. They both got it. Kurt coughed until he turned blue, and I had to pick him up out of his crib and shake him. Ken coughed until he irped, so I went around with a bucket from Sandra to Ken. John had not had any shots yet. He was not turning over by himself yet. So no matter where I was in the apartment, if he went, I had to drop everything and go in and see if he was choking or just making a baby noise. But eventually he got over that. Then they went through, I forget what came next, maybe mumps.
Hold on.
Now let's see, I forget what disease came next. Anyhow, they all got measles together. I don't know who brought those home. Could have been Kurt got the first dose of that. And anyhow, 2 weeks later, I had 3 more cases. But in the meantime, they had developed a measles shot. So I took the other 3 who didn't have it down to the doctor's office, and they got a shot that was supposed to prevent them from getting as hard a case of measles. Sandra and the other twin, whoever didn't have the measles, that did help them, but they did get the measles. John had a high fever, and after he broke out like raw beefsteak from head to toe, which should have brought the fever down, was still hallucinating. I would give him baby aspirin, and when his fever broke, he'd go crawling down the hall barking. He thought he was a dog. And that's the measles that year were that bad. And so the doctor finally said something's wrong because he's all broken out. He's still running a high fever. He's still going out of his mind when his fever breaks. So he came up the stairs saying, "Mrs. Hegland, I think you're just an over-anxious mother." He took one look at John. He said, uh-oh. He took him over by the light and looked in his eyes and apologized to me that John had an epidemic case of scarlet fever under a bad case of the measles. Mm-hmm. So he had to get shots for the scarlet fever. Then the next thing that came around, I think, was the mumps. I had a birthday party for Ken and Kurt and had some little friends over. And after the party was over and they went home, one of the mothers called and said, "Lil, I hate to tell you this, but my son has just started swelling up with the mumps." So I called the doctor, and he said, if the others don't start swelling up within 28 days, they weren't going to get the mumps. On the 29th day, John started swelling up. And during this whole time, the first one to get any of the childhood diseases had the lightest case, and the last one to get it had the heaviest case. So that time, John got off easy. He got the lightest case. Kurt had a in-between case. Ken went up like a balloon. Sandra went up on one side and then down. And so I thought, uh-oh, because they said if you just swelled up on one side, then when you were grown up, you could get them on the other side. And when you got mumps, when you were grown up, it could be very dangerous. So anyhow, eventually she did go up on the other side and then all the way across. She and Ken looked like basketballs when they had them up. And they had the mumps so bad, they could hardly eat. And then at night, when they went to bed, I had to put little helmets on the three boys and a wool scarf on Sandra before I put her to bed, because when the heat went down and it got chilly, they would wake up screaming from the pain, which was why they couldn't eat very much. They really hurt when they ate. Then the last thing that I think they had was chicken pox. And again, I can't remember who had them first. But that time, John ended up with the chicken pox last. And even though he didn't scratch them, after it was over, he still had some real deep pock marks from them. But the rest of them had fairly mild cases. But anyhow, I just remember my dad ever spanking me once when my older brother and myself were chasing fire trucks in Chicago. And we got lost. So I got lost in Chicago about 3 different times. And our way of finding our way home was to stop and start crying. And there were always some friendly people or somebody that would come along, and we always knew where we lived. And my dad was, well, they were upset, you know. I forget how old I was. I had to be younger. I was maybe even 4, maybe 5. And my brother was a couple years older. So he really turned both of us over his knee and paddled us. And because Les was too little to follow us, he stood there and laughed at us. I remember that.
Yeah.
But no, I remember my dad, but see, that particular part I just must have blocked out because I don't remember that. So if something is so traumatic to you, even when you get a little bit older, you know, it's possible to block it out and not know that that's what you're doing.
Oh, wait a second. Okay, now.
Okay, you ready?
Sorry, yeah. In
My
19
birth certificate, so...
Mention which year.
Oh.
Start over. Okay.
The whole thing. So
We're-
she told you about this.
Okay, Kodak Company was giving a free box camera to anybody born when they first went in business, which happened to be 1918. So my mother sent my birth certificate so I could take it down to a shop in Downers that had Kodak little box cameras and get one free. So I did that, and I had that little box camera for years and years and years before it finally probably would still take good pictures, but they don't even have film for it anymore. So I mean, there were ways like that that my mother did things for me, even though we didn't live together. So.
Right.
If they're not willing to make a change, then you separate yourself from the situation. But that doesn't necessarily mean you go out and get another one. But I mean, you're not one taking off that one. we don't have the rail on it yet, so. Oh yeah, this goes out and goes down the thing.
Does he?
So you see here, the mountains are obscured. You can see mountains like.
Beautiful. And you guys are gonna put railing.
Oh yeah, yeah, oh yeah. That's a law.
Oh, it's gorgeous.
I can move and you can take sort of the back thing too.
Okay.
Those wild flowers. Oh.
This is fine. It's perfect.
The privacy. Like that.
Well, look at the deer. Just look for another deer if it crosses. Oh no, those are the moms.
Yeah, this is railroad still going.
These fields here will just be full of elk, crazy animals. The farmers who used to run it's nuts because they couldn't pay here. They all become PTAs.
Yeah, it's reflecting quite a bit, but that's okay. Yeah.
Yeah, they're both warm.
I'd rather be in Phoenix.
Yeah, Judy's a warm weather person.
See you girls, have a lovely, day with all your women.
Bye, Grandma.
You should bring them around from the backyard and bring them down there.
You don't have to. They're already
They find,
over there.
oh, they're there.
And along the side. No, that would be for your husband to do because I was thinking about your landscape.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. How steep a hill is that going to be going up to your front door?
I'm not sure how he's going to do that.
Yeah.
How many steps?
Now, to me, now it seems steep, but then that's because there aren't any steps there.
Yeah, yeah, it is. Yeah, I'm not sure. He showed me, but he's in one ear and out the other.
You what?
I said he's shown me what he's going to do, but
Oh,
I don't take
Yeah. Yeah, everything takes so much time and energy and money.
time, energy, and money. The three things.
Hi, Grandma.
Hi.
I have to get your stylish walker on camera.
You get the whole thing?
Yep.
So the horses must be that way.
Yeah. Wonder where the sheep are.
Well, you see now that
Yeah, there you go. Looks just like Arizona, doesn't it? Don't we wish?
We came through these doors. We came on that wooden side. So watch where I'm going. Here for a while.
You also have step-by-step entire procedure required. Blacksmith would usually start off with a bar of metal that would be heavier than you needed, and then pound it down into the size you wanted. Once you had that, cut it into the proper length, and we'll just put some sharp points at the end of the bar. We'll finish that for 40 cabinet handles today. Then, just by placing the edge of the metal over the side of the anvil, hammering, you can develop this shoulder or step.
Okay.
Now, just that little mass of metal on the top, flatten that down into the leaf shape. Give it a little twist in the middle, bend it into shape, and then punch the holes.
Getting on film again.
How was it, Grandma?
Oh, it was bumpy but nice.
Bumpy but nice.
Yeah. That's the way to see it.
I know.
I noticed she didn't tell you guys about it. She made you walk around.
No, that's great.
The candy shop was closed, so they had it.
But there's some of it. But just along the boardwalk there, just down that green is where the sheep are.
Oh, yeah, I see that.
Yeah.
You want to go look at them? There's
Get them to go.
Yeah. So yeah. Exactly.
the other one is nice.
She's okay.
Oh no, she's okay. That's.
I won't.
And how old is she?
She's about 10.
Yeah. Yeah, he's.
She's gonna fight.
So how long has George been?
Gelded?
Yeah.
About 7 years now.
Probably.
Old Gelding.
Now these are our young ones over here,
Are
aren't
they
they?
here?
Yes, there you have it.
Part-
They're just
yeah.
giving them up to it at the moment, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah.
How old
That-
are they?
Oh, 1 year.
A year.
They're
like they're
last
year.
year's folks. Yes. Yeah, they grow fast around here.
So did you have 2 last year then?
In actual fact, we had 3, I think. I seem to remember having 3, yes. We sold one.
Okay. Now where's Hercules?
Oh, he's in his pen over the back there.
Oh, okay.
You see him.
And there's 2 or 3 mares here?
There's 2 mares and 2 foals.
2.
And
Okay.
they're in as small a pen as we can make them, because we don't want the foals to take too much exercise.
Okay.
And so it's kind of messy, especially after today when it's been wet.
It's wet.
we
Yeah.
can't
So is that the youngest one there?
Yes,
Or
it is, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And how old is he?
He's about 16, 17 days now, and the other one is a month.
I have to go over and see.
Yeah, aren't they cute?
Yeah. Now your cavaliers are here.
is the ram.
Oh.
I'm not sure about that. This is one of the ewes. That's a good girl. Yes, you are. Yeah, there's that's a baby. What are you trying to say? See, and then there are some little lambs in the shade over there.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're a friendly one, aren't you? He said, well, you don't have anything to eat for me. He's got a lot of milk.
I'm gonna get in trouble for taunting him. Bah! Bah!
Ooh.
They're trying to nurse.
Oh.
The mom called them over and said it's okay to nurse, and they came running.
Wow. He's hungry.